This episode is sponsored by HP. Most people are not counter-espionage experts, but that won't stop them getting targeted by cyber criminals seeking to extract their secrets.
HP understands that approximately 4 in 10 UK businesses have reported cyber breaches in the past 12 months alone. That's why HP business laptops, desktops, and workstations bought directly on HP Store are secure straight out of the box with their endpoint security.
No more stressing about dodgy emails or unexplained pop-ups. HP's independently verified Wolf Pro security works alongside your existing security tools to protect your business users and reputation from malware and evolving cyber threats with your first click.
You don't need an alias or a secret hideout to stay safe. Just Wolf Pro security working tirelessly to protect your hard work. It's security that's built in, not bolted on.
Find out more about how HP can protect your business at hp.com/classified. Podcast listeners benefit from a 10% discount on all business PCs, printers, and accessories using the code TRIC10. Terms and conditions apply. Technology is making many aspects of spycraft harder than ever. In an era of smart cities with video cameras on every street and facial recognition technology increasingly ubiquitous, spying has become much harder. For a CIA officer working overseas in a hostile country, meeting sources who are risking their own safety to offer valuable information, constant surveillance poses them an acute threat. Well, welcome to The Rest is Classified. I'm Gordon Carrera.
And I'm David McCloskey.
And that was former CIA Director Bill Burns. I think a friend of the pod, isn't he?
Friend of the pod. Oh, for sure.
Friend of the pod.
Absolutely.
Writing in Foreign Affairs a couple of years back about what we're talking about in this two-parter, on the second part now, which is about how technology is changing the human espionage business. Last time we kind of set up these ideas of ubiquitous technical surveillance, the ability of sensors and data to track people wherever they were, and just making really spying much harder. And this time we're going to continue that story, and we do have a special guest to continue taking us through this subject, don't we, David?
That's right. After our first episode, we convinced Glenn to stay. We are very lucky to have with us again Glenn Chaffetz, who is a former CIA officer, 3-time chief of station, and who is also the agency's first Chief of Tradecraft and Operational Technology. So Glenn, thanks for being back with us into this journey into technology and human espionage.
Glad to be here, David.
Glenn, last time I guess we left off discussing the kind of some of the challenges of clandestinity, which is basically how you operate and how much harder it's got in this world. And we're looking at some of the kind of key topics and the elements of the intelligence business. And I guess one of them is how you communicate, because that's a key fact. You know, we talked before about how you might find someone and then the challenges in going to meet them, which have got harder. But then it's how you, once you've maybe met them and started a relationship with someone, how you communicate with them without being spotted.
We've done some, I guess, fun historical stories that have featured unique kind of ways of communicating clandestinely between intelligence officer and asset. I mean, I guess, Gordon, the one that comes to mind immediately is we did that series earlier this year on Adolf Tolkachev, a spy for the agency operating in Moscow during the Cold War. And in that case, we sort of had everything from Tolkachev wandering up to the then chief of station in Moscow and like leaving a note on the door, dropping a letter inside, you know, his sort of open car window, to after he was recruited using these kind of impersonal signal sites or even short-range agent communications, these kind of burst devices that communicate between a device that Tolkachev has and a device that the case officer has. So we had this kind of historical cases of it.
Yeah, I thought you were going to mention pigeons, though, David. I thought, well, you know, if you go back to World War II, the use of pigeons for communication and clandestine communication. I won't dwell on pigeons anymore, but World War II pigeons, big radio
Won't
sets.
you, Gordon, though? Won't you? Don't make promises that you can't. Keep.
Glenn is probably very confused by my references to pigeons.
We need to start a tracker maybe one of our secret squirrels will start a tracker of the episodes in which Gordon mentions pigeons, because I would wager
maybe the ones I don't. Maybe the ones
maybe
I
the
don't
ones
is
you
easier
don't,
to
yeah,
count.
to make it easier on the person keeping tabs. No, you're right. Pigeons, radios,
Covert communications, radios, pigeons, and then you get to burst transmitters. And I guess, you're right. You go from kind of, yes, pigeons, but also big radio sets to kind of small radio sets to, burst transmitters. I mean, famously, the Brits got caught in the early 2000s using a spy rock. I always loved this, in Moscow. And they had according to the Russians, never denied by the Brits, and I think we know it's pretty true, but the Russians said that there was a kind of fake rock which had a receiver in it, and then someone would walk past the rock, press a button, and their transmitter would kind of beam the information into the rock, which then could be extracted from the rock at a later date, which gives you some idea of the kind of technology that's involved in covert communications when you're trying to keep the communication secret. So I guess that's the challenge.
The Brits, Gordon, are very creative in this field, I think, because if you remember back to the series we did on Mansfield Cumming, the first chief of the Secret Intelligence Service, you had some crazy people cooking up the idea of using semen for secret writing, right? So the Brits
Thank you very much, David. Male bodily fluid is how I refer to it.
Male bodily fluid is
the correct term.
Male bodily fluid is a worse term than the actual term, which I use. But I don't. Maybe we'll have to bleep out what I
yes,
used.
that was invisible ink. Invisible ink, we should say.
Yes.
We should say.
Yes.
That was to use for invisible ink, which I guess was another method of clandestine communication. These were some of the ways people used in the past. But I guess what we're heading to now is the fact, most communication is digital. But by definition, Glenn, I guess, this is maybe where you want to come in. Digital tends to leave a trail, doesn't it? Digital, the internet, all these things have problems, don't they, when it comes to communication?
Yeah, I can't talk about how asset handlers communicate with assets. I can say that communication is always a challenge. If you look back in history, humans are infinitely creative about how they convey information to other humans, as you just demonstrated in a way that I'd rather not rehash. But, the problem with digital communication is, again, that people have to think about what other people can see or hear or acquire and when. And again, they conflate aspects of that problem. So if you look at things that have been in the news, people famously said, okay, well, Signal is secure, or iMessage or WhatsApp. Any of these end-to-end encrypted commercial messaging apps are secure. Well, the content is secure. So if Gordon and David, you communicate via Signal, with some exceptions, no one's going to know what the content of that communication is. And we could talk about those exceptions. But they're going to know that you're communicating. And that's just as bad and dangerous for maintaining a clandestine relationship as knowing the content. If David has secrets for one country and Gordon, you're from another country and you're talking to David, that's going to look bad and that's going to pique the interest of David's country. So you have the content of the communication, you have the fact of the communication, and then you have the signature of the communication method. So for example, if you're in North Korea and you have an iPhone with Signal on it, that's going to look odd. Right? So you have to make sure that all of those things match. And, you have direct communication, you have indirect communication, you have simultaneous communication, you have communication that's delayed. And so I think the challenge in the digital age is for those who are communicating to work it out so that they hide the fact of the communication and the signature of the communication as well as its content. And again, it's a tremendous challenge. And I think there's very smart people in various agencies who know how to do this. I won't go into detail about the different ways that they can do it, but they managed to do it.
If I thought about, let's take the example you gave of Gordon and I communicating on Signal or WhatsApp. I mean, if you had money to go buy the data, how would you establish that connection? Put aside for a second the sort of content, but just Gordon and I being in contact on Signal.
Yeah.
How do you, committed spy hunter / just maybe like data broker, how do you get that? Where does that information come from? How do I get it so that I could do something with it.
Well, I mean, this is every single tech company and data broker in the world does this, which is your device is sending messages and Gordon's device is receiving those messages. And even without any of the content, they go through infrastructure. They go onto servers. You can work out the timing. If you're talking, you can infer the timing. If you're texting, right? A lot of the texting is done simultaneously. If you've ever watched kids texting, and I'm sure you do the same thing, you text, I text, it's not that hard, right? These two devices are in contact with each other. These two people know each other. That's part of the business model for the digital advertising environment. How do you establish someone's network? I could establish your network, David. I just buy the data about who you text, who you email. All those devices leave traces on the infrastructure. You buy that data, you run it through an algorithm. Here's David's network. You overlay that with travel. You overlay that with social media mentions. It's not that hard.
No, I always think it's interesting. You made a good point there. It's not always even about the content of the call, because I think people have a lot of ideas about encryption. And a lot of the tech companies will say, well, your communications are safe because they're end-to-end encrypted. I mean, I always think 2 points. One is your point, which is, especially if you're worried about the sensitivity of your communications, the content is encrypted, but the metadata, the data about the conversation, often is traveling on a normal telecoms network. And if you're a security service with access to the telecoms network, you can get that data and you can do all kinds of very clever, kind of network analysis of going, this phone's talking to that phone, but it's only talking to that phone and it talks to it once a week. You can do all that kind of stuff. And I guess the other point people make is it's end-to-end encrypted. At the two ends, it's got to be unencrypted and open, because otherwise you can't read a message. It's no good. So if you have access to the device itself, you get access to that and you can open it, whether through a thumbprint or knowing the passcode, then again, you're kind of into the actual content of the message and all the devices. So I sometimes think people in the who worry about security, and often, because I kind of deal with it a lot as a journalist, where sources are worried about it. And you've got to kind of be honest with people. It is hard if you're a journalist dealing with sources. If you're going to deal with them electronically, even over Signal or other messages, to kind of guarantee that there is no way of connecting the two of you or of ever knowing the kind of content of your communications. Very hard to guarantee, I think.
Well, precisely. So you raised two issues. So let's look at end-to-end encryption. There's the famous case of Pegasus and Jeff Bezos's phone. Pegasus and similar malware.
Yeah, we should explain what Pegasus is.
It's a malware that transmits what's on the phone to the cyber intruder. And when you open up your iMessage or Signal message or a WhatsApp message, whatever it is, and you're reading it on the phone, that's what Pegasus is reading. As you said, it's no longer encrypted. Great. It was end-to-end encrypted, but now it's reading it at the end. So it hasn't decrypted. It hasn't broken the encryption. It's reading it in the clear the same way that you are. And then the issue that you raised of the metadata is a really great point. Okay, so there's a lot of investigations that involve, say, for example, insider trading. Or is someone gambling? They investigate, okay, is this person gambling and he or she has inside knowledge of injuries or what have you? No, I've never gambled. And then all of your calls go to a bookie or to a legitimate gambling site, right? Well, you just said you're not gambling. And I don't have to have the content of the call to start the investigation, right? Or even to draw conclusions. I just have to know that you're in contact. There's a lot of investigations, for example, on insider trading and inappropriate sharing of information for financial firms. They're supposed to use dedicated phones that are recorded to make sure everything's on the up and up. A lot of them will use cell phones to get around that. Of course, that leaves a record. And it doesn't matter whether the content of the call is hidden. You shouldn't be on that phone. So now we have the signature issue, right? You can't be doing business work on that phone. And B, you've now established through metadata a connection with someone you should not be connected with, right? So I don't need, as an investigator, that content. I already know with near certainty that you've done something wrong. and the rest of it is just tying it up neatly.
I think the Pegasus point is fascinating because that is developed by commercial companies and then sold to lots of states,
Yes.
and states technically for law enforcement, counterterrorism, but we know it's been used, by lots of governments around the world for spying on political opponents, spying on journalists, all
No,
those kind of
I think the
things.
Saudis use this against Khashoggi
Yeah, exactly.
to catch and murder him. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's a perfect example where, something which had been quite a high-end technique, I guess, in the past, you'd have thought the ability to kind of break into someone's phone and capture everything that's happening on it. You'd have said, that is something that only GCHQ, NSA, maybe the Israelis and a few could do. And now it's something which is commercially made available to a much larger group of governments. So you see the kind of proliferation of spying technology which can be used to kind of surveil people. I think it's a really big shift, isn't it?
Well, this is what I was talking with David about before, which is that intelligence is a profession and an activity has jumped the tracks. And it was during this period that we talked about where all of this data became available and that it was able to be analyzed. And so you look at China, for example, which has turned its whole country into an intelligence state, not just to surveil and oppress its own population, but to steal economic information from the United States and Great Britain and Japan and South Korea and Australia and all the rest. And really it's turned intelligence into a mass activity where both the actors, the intelligence collectors, are no longer full-time professionals. They are business people. They are proxies for the government, or they turn the government into proxies for their businesses. And the objects of that intelligence are not state actors and government officials. They are companies like Apple and Google and GM and Goldman Sachs and anybody else who has, as we talked about at the beginning of the first show, who has information of value. And so what China has done has really taken this technology and expanded intelligence and attacks on its adversaries into the private sector. So it's a version of the old-fashioned, Francis Drake stealing Spanish gold, except on steroids, to use a cliche. David's going to be mad at me as a professional novelist.
We'll edit that out.
We'll edit out the cliche. Don't be trite, Glenn. But it's taken that and turbocharged and energized it and turned it into a mass activity. And so you look at, say, the 2017 intelligence law in China, Article 7, which says that every individual and every company in China must cooperate with China's intelligence services. And that goes both ways. So these companies go to the intelligence services and say, hey, we would like to get this information. And what you do is, instead of use this for a purely national security purpose, you use it for a business purpose to literally put rival companies in the United States and abroad out of business. This is the technology revolution plus the intelligence revolution. What one of our old colleagues, Anthony Vinci, calls the fourth intelligence revolution, together with neo-mercantilism. And that's the world that we're in right now. And that's the business that I'm in right now, is helping companies figure out how to defend their valuable information against companies and countries that work together to do what you just referred to, Gordon, which is steal all kinds of information using all of the means available.
I want to make sure we come back to this and I want to park this idea because I think there's a bigger question kind of rolled up in all of this, which is, does the Western intelligence model still work, and how will it be able to compete with the Chinese model? But maybe we could come back to that, because I wanted to ask again on the communication side. We talked about the idea that Gordon and I are talking. Okay, that's probably enough for an investigator to start to make investigation, right? If they just see two people that shouldn't be in communication. But Glenn, I want to ask about quantum computing here, and whether we should expect that in the future we'll even have encryption. So in other words, like, how much of what's the prospect that 5-10 years down the road there actually won't be any privacy even in the content of the communication?
Wow, a great question. Yeah, so quantum decrypts in seconds or minutes or hours that which under traditional encryption would take centuries to decrypt. And that's horrifying because our adversaries have already hoovered up untold quantities of encrypted information as they can and as we could. I mean, it's there for the taking out of the air and over the wires. But it's pretty useless right now because it's encrypted. But when you have quantum decryption, it's not useless. And all of that information at rest and all of that information in transit now is no longer secret. And that's horrifying. And the way to protect that information going forward is to use quantum encryption, which everybody is aware of, but they're not in a large scale. And the problem is we're not going to know that anybody has quantum decryption until it already exists. I mean, think about this. If you could decrypt everything that's encrypted, would you tell anybody about it? Hey, I'm all of a sudden able to read your mail and read your messages. You wouldn't, right? And we're not going to know if an adversary has that until after we're already sunk.
I mean, the parallel to me is always a bit like Bletchley Park. When Bletchley Park could break codes, you keep it quiet and you keep selling the people the idea that their messages are completely unbreakable.
Yeah.
And, Crypto AG did this for decades.
Right.
The Brits kept the Bletchley secret for decades because they could still read loads of information and gain loads of intelligence of it. Because everyone went, oh, my communications are perfectly secure on these devices. And so the reality might be, who knows, somewhere in China right now, there's a quantum computer, which is cracking all the messages, and which is a game changer for intelligence, because suddenly you then have this kind of radical transparency in which anything which isn't built with a new standard of kind of quantum resistant encryption is going to be transparent. A whole layer of secrecy and secrets and private information suddenly disappears. I mean, that's a kind of potential game changer, isn't it? In the
Oh, it's a
espionage
nightmare,
world.
Gordon. I mean, think about all the information that's already sitting in storage in data lakes that's encrypted, and then the capability to decrypt that. Think about the financial system, which depends on standard encryption. What's going to happen then?
I don't want to think about that, Glenn. That's terrifying.
I would like you to think about, David, perhaps that's your next novel.
All your financial information, David, all transparent to the world. Imagine.
Yes.
All your secrets, David.
If you put on your MSS hat, Glenn, which maybe you have behind you on the table there.
Yeah.
If you have that capability, what do you do with it?
Whatever you want, David, whatever you want. The sky is the limit. I mean, imagine, again, we're doing a hypothetical here, but imagine China has hoovered up some quantity of encrypted information that goes over the wires and over the air about the US military, about the US government, about the US intelligence establishment, and it's all encrypted. And then one day, because they've succeeded in decryption, they can read all of that mail. They can read all of that messages. Think about all of the things that they know. Think all of the things that the United States government wants to keep secret from China. And then you expand that beyond government to, okay, this is everything that Apple does and Google and Amazon and Anthropic and Microsoft and Goldman Sachs. I mean, it's just horrifying. The short answer is whatever they want. And so our secrets aren't safe. Our military planning isn't safe. Our intelligence operations aren't safe. Our money isn't safe. Money, credit, that's all based on trust. That's all based on the idea that these ones and zeros that are in computers are safe from theft. And now it's attacked now and again in a cyber way. The North Koreans have a nice little industry in attacking banks and crypto, but that's going to look like child's play. That's going to look like a tiny iota, a sty, compared to the absolute forest of secrets that are going to be revealed when quantum comes online.
Is it a certainty that it is coming? Is it just a matter of when? Is it like, maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10, or like, is it?
The joke is it's always 5 years away. Quantum computing is always 5 years away, the breakthrough. But I mean, I was talking to someone yesterday who said, might be really only 5 years away now.
Yeah.
That might actually be true.
Yeah, I don't know, but I wouldn't take the risk, David, that it's not, right? That we continue to make progress. It's not as if human beings are not making progress. on quantum decryption. They are. I can't tell you whether it already happened. I can't tell you, which is another thing that would keep me up at night, or if it's a day away or 10 years. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows.
That might be a good place to take a quick break on that moment of slight doom and gloom, and we'll come back after the break and see
with even
what
more,
we could do
with
about
even
this.
more doom.
No. We'll tell everyone everything is fine, but how we should think about this world of technology. One last look at it with Glenn, and we'll see you after the break.
This episode is brought to you by Attio, the CRM for the AI era.
Now, David, people think that spycraft is just car chases and secret codes, but an awful lot of it is just idling around, waiting for the action.
It's a bit like starting your own business. You think it's going to be as easy as creating and selling a product, but the reality is business owners spend far too long trying to get their CRM to fit a system not built for them.
Attio's AI-driven CRM enables you to take control of your platform, to build something from the ground up that fits your needs.
James Bond had Q's X-ray shades, an explosive watch, and a pen grenade. Business owners have Attio's real-time customer insights and platform that grows with them. All tools relevant for your mission to build a company from the ground up.
Attio even has something called agent collaboration.
Yes, but in this case, that means giving people the ability to let AI work seamlessly in the background for them.
Try Attio for free at attio.com/trick.
Welcome back. I think Gordon and Glenn, we've been talking for most of this kind of two-part series to this stage about how tech is changing the world of espionage, and in particular human espionage. We've been trying to do it from the lens of, I think, some key elements in the trade of human espionage. I thought we might switch for a second and actually talk about some specific pieces of technology, because there are some that I think the impact that they have spreads across the entire field of the intelligence business, and it'd be good to talk about them individually. I mean, I guess one that pops immediately into my mind that I think we really haven't talked much about yet is how cheaper, smaller drones or UAVs are impacting espionage today. Because obviously, I mean, we had the world of sort of armed drones that we see all around us in Ukraine, but I'm kind of thinking here, Glenn, of how maybe more from a just surveillance standpoint, the proliferation of really effective high quality drones that I can buy for my son that cost about $30. How does that whole landscape impact this kind of the business of human espionage today?
It's developed by leaps and bounds over the last few years, and I think we'll continue to see improvements in capability and reductions in price as technology goes in the next few years. So obviously it is a sensor platform, and it is cheap, and it is capable, and it's controllable. And that represents a danger, I think, both for state actors and for non-state actors. There was a story, I think, a few months ago in the New York Times about a drone loitering outside the window of Ericsson in Copenhagen. You know the story I'm talking about, David, where it's
I'm
photographing.
just laughing, thinking about a drone sitting outside a window, just watching.
I mean, think about this, right? Access to somebody's computer screen or keyboard is gold, right? If I could photograph you typing away, I could learn a lot about what you're doing. If you think you're safe because you're on the 40th floor of a building or the 14th floor of a building, and I just park a very quiet, very small drone outside that window and photograph the whole thing, I have all kinds of information that's useful. So that's a nifty little collection tool, which is partly human because you have the operator, but I can imagine scenarios in which the human is further and further away from the actual collection. And then it's stored and it's beamed, sometimes in real time, and then used. So that's an exceptionally valuable tool to have. we've already seen how valuable they are in the battlefield, but I would be worried about how valuable they are in terms of business intelligence. A lot of companies have very good access controls. And I'm not talking about companies in defense. I'm just talking about companies that might be targets of other companies abroad, principally from China, where that information confers tremendous advantage, getting back to our definition of intelligence. But they don't have any counter drone program. They don't operate in skiffs. They have windows for their people. They don't want their people to be like we had to be back in the day in these windowless offices deep inside buildings without windows. And so the possibilities really go from there. Add microphones to the cameras and you're really in business. Wi-Fi detectors, all kinds of sensors.
Sensors, microphones, cameras are now in cars. They are in, watches, they're in phone. We
Right.
used to think of it as just as phones as the tracking
Right.
devices or the sensor devices. But the extent to which everyday items are effectively
IoT.
being connected to the Internet of Things, exactly.
Yeah.
Your fridge speaks to the internet,
Right.
and it's the point is convenience to tell you, have you run out of milk, and I can order it for you.
Right.
But it also may be able to tell someone who could easily hack into it, because I bet its cybersecurity isn't very good. Is this person at home at the moment? Have they not opened the fridge for 2 days? In other words, is that a good time to break in? Or are they stocking up extra bottles of vodka in their freezer, which maybe is a sign of alcoholism
Well-
or some other indicator? So, it's that kind of everyday pervasiveness of this, which I just think it's really game changing, isn't it?
Well, everything you buy. I have a real ambivalence about these loyalty programs, right? The point of the loyalty program is it's to charge people who don't share information more money is the point of the loyalty program, right? So you go to the store, right? And they're like, oh, I see you're buying, this was obviously many years ago. I'm buying a newspaper. Can I have your phone number? No, you can have my money. And then you give me the newspaper. What do I have to give you my phone number for? So that you know that I bought the Wall Street Journal on Friday? That's not, why do I want a networked scale? Good God, no. I don't, and then your credit card bill tells people masses of information about you. And of course, after COVID, no one uses cash anymore. The wonderful thing about cash is it divorced your identity from your behavior. But try spending cash in a lot of places and you can't, or they discourage you. And so
Definitely China.
right.
Yeah.
You can't.
But cryptocurrency offers some
No, it's
some benefits to people.
No, you spend the time, you can track it. It's, they have tumblers but eventually, given enough effort, you're not going to be able to hide. So yeah, blockchain offers some advantages, and it really discourages investigators because it's a lot of work. But and Tor, same thing. But all of those things can eventually be unwound. It's the time and effort of the investigator.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just you mentioned Tor, which is the onion router kind of dark web. I think we started the first episode with a quote from the chief of MI6, the last chief of MI6, Richard Moore. And in that same speech, he also launched, I think, something called Silent Courier, which was a kind of portal, a platform for people to contact MI6 on the dark web. And on the one hand, that's a kind of example maybe where technology is an enabler for a spy service, because you've got the equivalent of walk-ins, people who want to offer themselves up to a spy service. I think of Mitrokhin, just because I've written a book on him, who walks into the, the American and then the British embassies in the Baltics in 1992. In those days, you had to walk into an embassy to contact them. Now you can try and use one of these dark web platforms, and they promise a degree of anonymity to contact MI6. And I think CIA runs a kind of similar thing, quite openly, saying to Russians particularly, if you're aggrieved with your government, use this platform to approach us. So I guess, that is an example where some of that technology is an enabler, but I guess it also creates a single point of failure and some risks as well. But you got a lot of pressure on that one platform and that one point of contact.
Well, Gordon, I don't want to talk about that one. That's
that's okay.
That's not what I want to comment on.
No, that's fine. But I'll comment on it. And I think it's really interesting because I think it is an example where technology, it's the fact it's enabling and a risk. And I think that's the kind of interesting thing about technology, isn't it? Is that, there's two sides to the coin for lots of this.
Going back to the Internet of Things point, I was having a conversation, I don't know, it's a couple of weeks ago with a cybersecurity expert, and I was actually doing book research, and he was telling me a story about the proliferation of cases he's seeing of people who have their Wi-Fi hacked by someone going in through a pretty
Right. Right.
a device like
Yeah.
a washing machine or a refrigerator or your connected scale that does not have the same level of defense as the traditional router, but is still connected to it all the same, because you just sort of don't think about it like, well, am I doing software updates on the washing machine?
Right.
No,
Right.
and it's the weak link, but you just almost don't even think about it now. It's
Yeah.
totally normal to have a washing machine that's connected to my Wi-Fi. Why not?
Your toaster is spying on you. That could be the title of
Yeah.
your next book. It's
Yeah.
horrifying.
One topic we've talked about in little bits and pieces throughout this conversation has been artificial intelligence. And this is a huge question. And obviously, the impact of AI on the intelligence business it's not just impacting human, it's impacting analysis and everything, right? But I'm curious from your standpoint, Glenn, I mean, how should we think about the way that AI is disrupting the human intelligence game?
To the degree that it speeds up collection, analysis, interpretation, it represents, I think, an offensive weapon in terms of collection, a potential tool for counterintelligence, and a potential tool for analysis. What do all of these features mean, and how quickly can we make these associations that we wouldn't do if we didn't automate them? So I don't think everybody understands yet all of the implications for AI and machine learning. The one that I've probably paid attention to the most is the collection of faces and the analysis of faces, and how it is made that a lot better. It can also be used for spoofing voices and spoofing video. So we've had a number of cases where we look at companies and they're vetting people, and they're doing these interviews like this one over a video channel, and the person is not the person they're purporting to be, because they've used AI tools to disguise what their face looks like and what their voice looks like. And now, right now, that's fairly crude, and there's some very easy ways of determining that, but that's going to get harder and harder as time goes on. You talked about identity earlier, Gordon, really face to face, but you also have identity over the phone, and you have identity over video chats.
Yeah.
And I think that's easier to disguise, and people have to determine fakes. And then you have to look at influence operations. What's real?
Yeah.
And intelligence services, malign intelligence services, could flood the zone with fakes. Now, it doesn't matter that it's determined to be a fake necessarily from their perspective, in the sense that nobody then believes anything.
Yeah.
Then you have the inability to separate fact from fiction.
Am I really speaking to David or not?
Yeah.
That definitely scares me. But I mean, I guess as we kind of, start to round things up, I mean, this world of deep fakes, of AI, of not being sure who's who, human intelligence, the point of it, as opposed to kind of cyber or digital intelligence, is that there is a human relationship, I guess.
Yes.
And at some point it requires two people in a room,
Yeah.
or probably to be physically together and to talk to each other and have a relationship and look into each other's eyes, not in a romantic way, but in a kind of intelligence way, and say, do I trust you?
Yeah.
That is the kind of core of the business. Does it survive, do we think?
It certainly shrinks. I think the opportunities for doing that have shrunk. I think the opportunities for human have shrunk, in part because you can achieve so much now with data, with collecting commercially available and openly available information and parsing that together. And that makes the analyst, the targeter, a much more important piece, the OSINT investigator, a much more important piece of intelligence collection and analysis. But there's still a role for humans. None of that data can tell me what a foreign adversary leader, call it Xi, call it Putin, whomever, no one can tell me what he perceives at a particular time, what he plans, what he intends. That can only be gleaned from someone in the inner circle. And then getting in touch with that person in the inner circle and determining whether that person is willing to share, and then arranging the transfer of that information is much more difficult now. And I think the opportunities to have long conversations where you build that relationship have diminished, because We're trying to have those conversations in a sea of sensors and data. And that's just hard.
I remember reading an article, I think a couple years back, and I know you won't comment on it, but just I'll put it out there. There was a Washington Post article that was quoting somebody from the agency as saying, hey, the number of recruitments is down over the last 4 or 5 years. We're recruiting fewer human sources than we used to. And it seems like I'd always sort of conceptually thought, oh, it's a supply side problem in that it's just harder to do it because of all these tech challenges. So we're trying, but we're not having as much success, or it's in certain cases, it's impossible. But I guess I'm hearing you say it's also kind of a demand side problem in that a lot of the questions that we would have had in the past where we would have tasked human collection, we don't need to anymore. So in some ways, if human is kind of the market share is shrinking, it's not necessarily just because it's harder, it's because there might actually be less demand to actually put some of these questions to humans than we had in the past. The exception being the plans and intentions point that you're raising, which is, what is Xi thinking? What is Putin thinking?
Right.
Those are evergreen questions where you actually really want a well-placed human to give you that perspective.
I would just go back to the scenario where you have a leader you want to know something about, right? That leader's scale is networked. His toaster is spying on him. He's got social media. He drives in a car made after 2003, or is driven in a car made after 2003, which means that it produces a digital exhaust, which can be tracked. The leader speaks on a cell phone. The leader's photographed. The leader's roundly quoted. There's all sorts of information about that leader, both intentionally and unintentionally produced, that tech companies derive great insights from, great analysis from, and governments can do the same. And so what we had to collect via human about that person, about any person, has logically shrunk because you can do that remotely by buying that data. So that's not a failing. That's just a change in technology. I can't comment on any story about numbers or quality of recruitments, and I don't even know. I mean, I've been retired for years now. I would just say logically, knowing the capabilities of big data, and let's call this tech revolution big data, you can find out facts and derive additional facts from that data that you could not do 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. It's even so much better now than it was 5 years ago.
Open source intelligence and digital intelligence and cyber espionage.
Yes.
They all offer new ways of kind of stealing secrets or getting hold of useful information, I guess.
And then you combine all of those.
But I guess what's interesting, isn't it, is the fusion of all of these things, because you get a sense that these days, human espionage is enabled by the digital and the open source. The kind of mixing of it means that the old days where you think back to the old kind of Cold War spy stories, and it would always be about that kind of the kind of fighter pilot, case officer or, MI6 officer, who was the individual who just was the kind of lone operator who would kind of go and talk that agent into being. That doesn't work in the modern spy world, does it? Because you need digital analysts around you as well to build up the profile of the person you're going to talk to. You need maybe, some cyber espionage around it. You might need some technical knowledge. It's a kind of, it's changed the game in that way.
Yeah, I certainly think it's become much more of a team sport now than it used to be because of technology. I think the best operations have a bit of all of these elements in them. A lot of cyber operations are enabled by human. A lot aren't, right? Social engineering, I mean, a lot of cyber operations are a result of people getting people's logons, right? And getting their credentials.
Yeah.
Simple things like overhearing a conversation or shoulder surfing can enable cyber operations. Parking a camera on a drone outside someone's window can see somebody type in a password. You slow it down and you see how they type it in. There's all kinds of ways to blend cyber and signal and human intelligence. And our adversaries do this every single day.
I wanted to go back because I think when we were talking about communication before the break, I parked a question on the kind of intelligence business model
Yeah.
that we've built up versus maybe the Chinese one. And I'm curious if you think, are we adapting?
No.
Like, is our business model catching up?
No.
Yeah.
No, we're not. I mean, we're playing two different games. So China, which is the best example, is an intelligence state in which the party state and companies, I won't call them the private sector because there is no true private sector in China. It doesn't have a rule of law. They steal from each other just as they steal from us, but they have a national theft program. And NSA Director General Keith Alexander talked about this 20 years ago. It was the most massive transfer of wealth in human history. This is getting back to the neo-mercantilism.
Yeah.
Where it's not to say that China doesn't innovate. It certainly does, but it doesn't have to innovate as much as we do because we're subsidizing its R&D. American companies don't do that. It's against the law. Here, it's against the law to do it to ourselves, and it's against the law to do it to Chinese companies. China doesn't have that problem. It steals private sector information. This is again what I work on now is helping companies protect themselves against this because they don't realize the degree and scale of the theft. And this has national security implications because essentially what China is doing, as the Ottomans and the Portuguese and the Dutch did to Venice, they're trying to put us out of business. And that's going to destroy our economy, and it's going to destroy or certainly diminish our strength as a state. And it's not just the United States, it's all of its allies. And I think very few companies are aware of this. And our national security establishment is not set up to deal with this. It was set up to do with the Cold War and to a certain degree, terrorism. It wasn't set up to deal with an adversary that wages a gray zone hybrid war on the US private sector and national infrastructure.
My next question was going to be, what keeps you up at night, Glenn? But I think you might have just answered it.
Yeah. That does. I mean, that keeps me up at night. Quantum keeps me up at night. I mean, the fact that companies are still rushing to do business with China, knowing that their IP is at risk, at least understand what your valuable information is and take steps to protect it. But in many cases, the information's not stolen, it's freely given away. I'll give you our IP if you allow us access to your market. I don't think that's worked out terribly well for the United States economy or private sector.
Maybe this is the question I'll close on then, which is just to go back to this central topic of tech and how it's impacting the espionage business. For people who are listening, who are thinking about the job of a case officer, what do you think that job is going to look like in the future, given all the changes we've talked about? At the human level, what does that job look and feel like, do you think?
Yeah, you really put me on the spot there, David. That's a huge question. I expect it's going to involve a lot more reliance on data and technology than it does now. I think that case officers currently need to have much greater technological aptitude than they did back in my day. I think that's only going to increase to understand the capability of sensors, to understand the capability of computation, to be able to separate out fakes from reality. I don't think old-fashioned human people-to-people relationships are ever going to disappear, as Gordon was talking about a few minutes ago, but I think it's going to shrink. Because the idea of a case officer, even protecting his identity and job, has gotten so much more challenging. And so the way that China has dealt with this is they've turned their whole country into intelligence collectors through things like the national intelligence law and the national security law, and this, a massive intelligence establishment and a giant hacking cyber intrusion force. It's an intelligence state. The way they've changed intelligence, and again, this is out in the open. They don't hide their law. Oh, they say, oh, we wouldn't do that to you. Well, then why do you have the law? If you're not going to use your population as intelligence collectors, why do you mandate that they become intelligence collectors? I think you're going to see a lot of that. I can't speak to the United States, but other countries, China, Russia, among them, have blended the private sector together with the national security sector to make something that's even more dangerous.
Well, Glenn, I think that's probably a good place for us to wrap up. And I think we've got a real understanding of why, we started off with a former chief of MI6 saying adapt or die, basically, when it comes to technology. And I think what we've hopefully done over these 2 episodes is unpick what that means, what technology is doing to both the intelligence business, but also to kind of privacy, secrecy.
Yeah.
It's making us all kind of spied on, all spies, but also kind of restricting the space for some of the old-fashioned spying we think about. Not as easy to write about, is it, for your books, David? I think some of this stuff.
No.
But it's kind of the reality. I mean, you do capture some of it in the novels. It's harder, isn't it?
It is. I deal with it every day when I'm writing, where you're trying to write a story about characters, about people, in a business that is dealing less and less with actual human interaction. So a lot of the scenes that I would have written in books, your point, Glenn, 15, 20 years ago, they don't happen. It's that meeting of the source in the parking garage. That's a great scene to write about, but does it work anymore? Not really. So the real downside here for novelists are the ultimate losers in this game.
Poor
Spy
novelists.
Yes.
2 words for you, David: historical fiction.
Historical fiction. That's the
Go back
takeaway.
to the Cold War.
Revert to the past, baby.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Thanks for joining us on this journey, Glenn. We appreciate you coming along and educating us and our listeners in this, hugely important topic, and one that I think will be coming back to over and over again on the stories we tell on the pod. So thanks for being with us.
Thanks very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
So thanks to Glenn. Thank you all to listening. Just a reminder that if you want more of these kind of interviews with people who are insiders in the spy world, then do join the Declassified Club at therestisclassified.com, where you'll get plenty more like that, won't they, David?
That's right. And Gordon, we'd be remiss if we didn't say we do have our live show coming up in London on the 31st of January. So you can go to therestisclassified.com. I think we've still got a few tickets left. Get those there and join the club as well. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.